Since you all made it this far, I welcome you to the finale of this series. This part will focus on gameplay, which is the most important part of the entire TCG. This video will be separated into a lot of parts: deck building, setup, start phase, roll phase, brawl phase, damage phase, and the end phase. This part does have a lot of visuals to help you through playing, and most of it will use this map made by Magnus of YouTube and Toolbox24 from World Series Universe. They don't upload much anymore, but you can still check their channels in the description. Let's start with my favorite part of Bakugan Pro, deck building. This will require some creative thinking. Your deck needs to be composed of 3 unique Bakugan figures of your choice, their respective character cards, their respective Baku cores, and a 40-card deck. Reminder, if you want to use a Geogon card, you have to use its respective toy, and Nanogon cards cannot be put into your deck. These are all reminders from part 2. The factions of the cards in your deck should match the factions of your Bakugan. If you are using a Fusion Bakugan, the faction of your cards should match the faction of the unfused side. Like I said in part 2, it's the side you start with. Dual faction cards can only be put into your deck if both factions match 2 of your Bakugan's factions. For example, if I want to put Shadow Flame in my deck, I have to have a Pyrus Bakugan and a Darkest Bakugan in my deck. One more important thing, you can use up to 3 copies of the same card. Cards that got reprinted count as different copies. For example, I have 2 Turn to Energy cards in my deck, but if I use a reprint from Secrets of the Geogon, it counts as a copy of the same card, so plus that, and the 2 mentioned earlier, I have 3 copies of Turn to Energy in my deck. This also applies to Deep Dive, Halt Outsiders, and Repel Outsiders. Moving on to the setup, your things should be out of the way for the rolling phase. Your Bakugan and your deck should be adjacent from each other. Your energy pile should be behind your deck, and your discard pile should be next to your deck. Your played heroes should be in front of your Bakugan, and your Nanogon should be in front of your deck. Nanogon have a used pile and an unused pile. They should be next to each other. Or you could do something like what I have set up. Up to you. And yes, I did realize that this part was complicated. Next is setting up the hide matrix. You and your opponent flip a coin, roll a die, or flip a Baku core. Say I call heads and my opponent calls tails. If the coin or Baku core is tails, your opponent places the first Baku core from his deck. Then you and your opponent keep taking turns until all of your Baku cores are on the field. Afterwards, you and your opponent draw 5 cards. This is your starting hand. You also have the option to cut cards from your deck. This is done by taking an amount of cards from the top of your deck and placing it on the bottom of your deck. This allows for more late game clutches. One more important thing about your hand size is that it is limited to 7 cards and can be manipulated with only 1 card, and that is Sophie Fusion Brawler from Shields of Astroya. As if most of the stuff I said earlier was complicated, the next few parts are also extremely complicated and somewhat hard to explain, so bear with me. The start phase has 2 sub-phases, the draw phase and the energy phase. The draw phase requires both players to draw a card, meaning you should have 34 cards left in your deck after the setup and the first draw phase. The energy phase gives both players the option to energize a card in their hands, meaning it cannot be played but it can be used for energy, which I talked about in parts 1 and 2. I also mentioned in part 2 that flip cards cannot be played from your hand. You only have the option to play them while taking damage, so flip cards are more recommended to energize from your hand. You can play cards during the start phase, but only after the energy phase. Next is the roll phase. Both players roll their Bakugan at the same time. If they both open, a battle occurs. If one opens and one doesn't, the open Bakugan wins unless the closed Bakugan has a reroll ability, or an ability card that gives it the ability to reroll is played and the Bakugan lands on a core. If neither Bakugan open, both players reroll. For Bakugan with the reroll effect, this does not waste the reroll ability. The Brawl Phase starts when both Bakugan open. You add B power based on your Bakugan's base B power, plus the B power boost on the Baku core, if applicable, and the effect of your character card, or the effect of any ability or Nanogon card in battle, if applicable. For organization with Nanogon, your Bakugan's captured core goes in between its character card and the hero zone. For example, Darkest Hydrus and Batrix has a base B power of 300, plus a Fist core that gives it 150 B power, and its effect gives it 500 B power when on a Fist core, so its score is added up to 950 B power. My opponent's Ventus Trox has a base B power of 500, plus a magic shield that gives it 650 B power, making its score 1150. That doesn't mean it's over yet. Both players take turns playing ability cards based on how much energy they have. If this is the first Brawl Phase of the game, the youngest player plays their ability cards first. Otherwise, the winner of the previous Brawl Phase can play their ability cards first during the match. You can pay for ability cards by rotating your energy cards 90 degrees clockwise. Now they are uncharged and do not get charged until the next start phase, as seen in part 2. Say I played Darkest Scion for 5 energy, then Hydorus' B power is up to 1650, so Hydorus wins and the game moves on to the damage phase, and the loser returns their Bakucore face down in the high matrix and closes their Bakugan. The damage phase is where the loser takes damage based on the victor's damage. You add up damage similar to how you add up B power. Hydorus has a base damage of 5, plus its fist core giving it plus 2 damage, meaning your opponent takes 7 damage or flips 7 cards. If one of those cards is a flip, the person taking damage has the option to play the card if they have enough energy. If all 3 Bakugan are open, a team attack occurs, adding up all Bakukores and damage from your Bakugan. All Bakugan close after a team attack and their cores return to the field. The damage phase is also where armor rating comes into play, where it absorbs damage based on how much you have, like mentioned in part 2. Keep in mind, during the damage phase, your opponent could flip a card called Black Hole, which brings the game back to the start phase, meaning no further damage is taken, the end phase is skipped, and uncharged energy cards do not charge. The end phase is the shortest phase of the game. You can also play heroes and some action cards during this phase. If neither player chooses to play cards during this phase, or a player is done playing cards, all uncharged energy is recharged and the start phase begins again. This goes on until a player runs out of cards in their deck. If a player takes more damage than the cards in their deck, they flip the remaining cards. If none of them are stop cards, the damage dealer wins the entire game. Before we end here, there's a few other miscellaneous things I forgot to mention. Nanogon can only be played if your team has a certain number of Bakukores, a certain type of Bakucore, or both. Once their effect is played, they go into their use pile. There are a lot of other things I missed or got wrong, so feel free to check out other Bakugan Pro YouTubers like D-Hard, Bakutal Ren, HM Warrior, Rush 808, Viva La Hunt, Prince of Darkest, and many others for reference. And also, thanks to the Bakugan Wiki for the information used in this series. If you are interested in the TCG or other assets of Bakugan, the link will be in the description.